All eyes will be on the opposition, as Minority Leader Kelvin Morris will lay a motion seeking clarity on the recent restructure exercise at Tobago Agribusiness Development Company. Thursday, January 25th, from 1:30 p.m. Don't miss the 26th sitting of your Tobago House of Assembly. Our doors are open and our connections are clear, so you can either come in or tune in. Either way, don't miss it.
Let us now pray. Almighty God, as we have come together to begin our meeting of the Assembly, we humbly beseech you to grant to all our members the light and guidance of your Holy Spirit, that we may wisely take counsel together and come to such decisions as shall promote your glory and the well-being of all citizens in this our land, so that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be enjoyed by all people. Grant this for the sake of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Members, you may be seated.
Oath of allegiance of a new member. Announcements by the presiding officer. Assembly Bill.
Madam Clerk, just a small announcement. Honorable members, I'd like to officially welcome you back to the House, and I hope that you have a happy new year. I would like to propose 1 minute of silence for the passing of our first Chief Secretary, the Honorable Pochoy Charles. Thank you, honorable members. You may be seated.
Assembly bills sent back from Cabinet. Assembly laws brought back from Parliament. Petitions, papers. Presentation of reports from Dispute Resolution Commission, select committees, Chief Secretary's questions, questions to secretaries, Questions for oral answer.
Minority Leader.
Thank you. Presiding Officer, question number 83 to the Secretary of the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development.
Assemblyman James.
Madam Presiding Officer, it's always an honor to present in the House. The positions of the board at Stolly Park Quarry, Mr. Ashworth Jack is the chairman of the board at an honorarium of $10,000. Ms. Alicia Patterson is the deputy chair at an honorarium of $7,000. Directors, Mr. Collis Brown at $6,000. Mr. Curtis Douglas, director at $6,000. Mr. Christian Virgil, director at $6,000. Mr. Lane, director at $6,000. And Ms. Mirette Douglas, secretary to the board at $4,500.
Any follow-up questions?
Presiding Officer, can the Secretary kindly share with this Honorable House the qualifications of the chairman of the Board of Directors of Stolly Park Enterprise Limited, please? Because this is a very important board.
Assemblyman James.
Madam Presiding Officer, I wasn't prepared for that question. That question can be posed at another sitting and I'll be honored to answer it.
Can you submit via writing to the Minority Leader's office, please?
I beg your pardon?
Can you submit the answer via writing to the Minority Leader's office, please?
As you so direct, Madam Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Minority Leader.
Madam Presiding Officer, can the Secretary kindly share with us whether the company vehicle is part of the remuneration package of the chairman?
Assemblyman James.
Madam Presiding Officer, the full package of the chairman includes a telephone and a company vehicle.
Minority Leader.
So just for clarity, does that also include the company vehicle of the Stolly Park Enterprise Limited, the executive vehicle? Just for clarity.
That was just he just answered that question.
No, I didn't get a yes or no. He just said what exactly. He said, I think telephone. So I just want for clarity.
He just answered that question.
No, but does it include the vehicle? Yes or no?
Minority Leader, he just answered the question. Are there any more follow-up questions?
That's it.
Question 93, Minority Leader.
Question number 93 to the Secretary of Food Security, Natural Resources, the Environment and Sustainable Development.
Assemblyman Charles Panton.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Which company is occupying this space? The answer, West Indian Traders Limited. What is the amount of space being rented and at what cost? 2 spaces being rented by the same West Indian Traders Limited. One, the size of the space, 880 square feet, and the other, 1,161 square feet. The company invested $300,000 to upgrade the space. This was necessary based upon the company's inability to undertake the works. Due to the absence of financing and in the short time frame required by the tenant's global partner negotiations were engaged to retain the business opportunity and a standard commercial lease engaged at $7 per square foot, representing a 65% reimbursement on the capital outlay, which will be repaid in 2024. West Indian traders have shown interest in renting the entire bay in the near future, therefore increasing employment on the island. The previous rent was $5 per square foot for dry storage and 29 cents per kilogram for cold storage, which resulted in not enough funds to upkeep the compound and resulted in deterioration of the equipment. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Minority Leader.
Madam Presiding Officer, can the Secretary tell this Honorable House what is the usual rental rate per square foot for tenants in the building? What is the usual rental rate?
Assemblyman Pantin.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. As I stated earlier, the previous rent, $5 per square foot for dry storage and 29 cents per kilogram for cold storage.
Minority Leader.
Madam Presiding Officer, this opportunity for a tenant to retrofit the bay down at Tico Suave, is this an opportunity that was publicly advertised so that other Tobagonians, other persons interested could so get that opportunity?
Assemblyman Pantin.
Madam Presiding Officer, I would have to get back to the minority with that information as to the process.
Thank you.
But he's free to submit questions at any time, and I will humbly oblige.
So
Minority Leader.
I looked near, I looked far, I looked on all the THA official website. I did not see an advertisement advertising this opportunity, and therefore is the Secretary, was preferential treatment given to this person?
I believe she indicated that the answer to that question could be provided to you. So I'm going to allow her to submit the answer to your office. Yes? Question 94, Minority Leader.
Question 94 to the Secretary of Food Security. I know the rest.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Can the Secretary please confirm the name of the human resource consultancy engaged by TADCO and the remuneration package? I am not familiar with any human resource consultancy being engaged for that process.
Minority Leader.
Madam Presiding Officer, we didn't ask about a process. We asked specifically if TADCO at any point of its existence during the tenure of this Secretary engaged. The question is whether, and I'm now going to follow up, is whether TADCO engaged the service of any HR individual or company to provide any kind of HR-related advice.
Assemblyman Pantin.
The answer to that question is no.
What?
Minority Leader.
Madam Presiding Officer, so just for clarity, the Secretary is saying that at no point in time TADCO paid to any individual or company any payment for any HR-related work.
She responded
I just want to confirm.
Is there a follow-up question?
I'm just confirming whether the
I
company-
understand that, but is there a follow-up question?
Yeah?
Is there a follow-up question?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Just wanted to confirm, and she's free to confirm. I'm giving her a second opportunity.
She answered. Moving on. Question 95, Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Question 95 to the Secretary of Food, Security, Natural Resources, the Environment and Sustainable Development.
Assemblyman
Natisha.
Charles Pantin.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Because the motion is based on this question, I would like to defer, but I will answer and say normal HR practices were adopted by TADCO, normal as you would use with the Tobago House of Assembly and its companies and agencies outside of the Tobago House of Assembly.
Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, based on the reports and information coming from TADCO through its chairman, it was indicated that the majority of the members of the employees their contracts were not renewed. That is the language that this administration is using. And if the majority of the members of TADCO's contracts came to an end and they were not renewed, who would have engaged in this normal process that is done by the Assembly?
Can I have a question, please?
And that is the question, Madam Presiding Officer. Since the majority of employees, even except some security guards and cleaners, who would have engaged in the normal process that the Assembly would engage in to hire persons?
Assemblyman Pantin.
Madam Presiding Officer, because her speech is jumbled and not well put together, I cannot respond to the question.
Minority Councillor, do you wish to be a little bit clearer so you could get the answer to your question?
Madam Presiding Officer, so I will take it back a bit. How many persons were retained after the contracts of over 60 employees of TADCO came to an end? How many persons and what were the positions of those persons?
Assemblyman Pantin.
Madam Presiding Officer, that question is not on the order paper. She's free to gather her thoughts.
It's in keeping with the line of question.
Yes, but I also said that I will explain the entire process during the motion that they presented to the House.
Madam Presiding Officer, I know that the minority is bringing a motion in relation to TADCO, but we are asking, and I am asking a question and a follow-up question in direct relation, because the Secretary seems not to understand what I'm saying, so I'm breaking it up into sizes, bite size, that she can understand.
Sure.
I'm going to allow for you to give the answer to the Minority Council's office. All right? Question 99, unless you have any more follow-up questions, Minority Councillor, you actually have one.
Madam Presiding Officer, the minority is still interested in knowing who would have commenced the process for the re-engagement of employees. Who would have commenced the normal process that is outlined by the Assembly at TADCO for the re-engagement of workers? When all the workers, or the majority of workers' contracts came to an end, who would have engaged in the re-engagement process?
Assemblyman Pantin.
Madam Presiding Officer, the board of TADCO is still in place. The HR unit is still in place. So I don't know if that answers her question.
Question 99, Minority Leader.
Madam Question 99 to the Secretary of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development.
Assemblyman James.
Madam Presiding Officer, the question reads, as it relates to the recent payment of daily
Late. I'm not sure if
The recent late payment of daily rated workers, can the Secretary indicate the following? What was the reason for the delay in the payments to those daily rated categories of workers? Madam Presiding Officer, late wages at the Division of Infrastructure is a perennial thing. It is something that we inherited. We have attempted to grapple with this situation along the payment work cycle, if you will. The process is that checkers submit their sheets to the various arms in the main office, and the sheets are evaluated and checked for errors, and they go upstairs. Along that line, sometimes checkers are late, sometimes sheets have errors. The accounts department, in my opinion, is working to correct the situation. We have met with the accounts department, met with some of the checkers in an attempt to look at the whole process to see how we can streamline the process and ensure that there are no bottlenecks. However, Madam Presiding Officer, we have a situation with the development program that we've met where development workers have become quasi-permanent workers because the past administrations employ them for the full 12 months of the calendar year. And when September comes, there's usually a shortfall of funds to pay development workers, and therefore you find that we await unspent balances in most times between September and October to meet the wages for development workers. Maybe that's one of the reasons. We're also working on that. We've discussed at Executive Council how we can assign unspent balances earlier so that wages could be paid, and it's an issue we will continue to grapple with. It's not only at my division, but I'm sure it is at food production, at health, and so on. What systems are in place? I think I answered both questions.
Minority Leader.
Madam Presiding Officer, I would simply like to find out from the Secretary whether he has ever been paid late, because now it's as a real question, because it seemed to me that being paid late is being proffered as an acceptable thing, and I just want to know if he has ever been paid late.
That's not in keeping with the question.
Pardon me?
I beg you, Madam Presiding Officer.
I'm addressing the Minority Leader. That's not in keeping with the question on the order.
The question is about late payments.
Not to secretaries, to daily rated workers.
Madam?
It's not in keeping with the question on the order paper. Do you have a follow-up question?
Of course, I'm following up, Madam Presiding Officer. No problem. Madam Presiding Officer, this is the Secretary saying to the people of Tobago that this unprecedented, consistent occurrence of daily rated workers being paid late by this administration is as a result of inefficiencies within the public service, or as a result of the public servants not doing their work properly, because that is what I'm hearing based on the excuse.
Assemblyman James.
Madam Presiding Officer, sometimes I grapple with these questions. I've said before that there is a work process, a workflow that starts with the preparation of the names and the sheets, the time books and so on that come to the main office, that are checked, double-checked, and go upstairs to be paid. That is the process. The secretary is not involved in the process. The assemblymen are not involved in the process. This is a strictly public service process that has been in place forever. It has nothing to do with monies coming to the division late, nothing to do with that. I don't know what the member, the minority leader, is alluding to. However, let me repeat for clarity that this is a long-standing problem that we have inherited and that we continue to work hard to ensure that the men who labor and toil in the sun out there get their pay on time.
Minority Leader.
Madam Presiding Officer, I'm reminded of a quote by the member for Palliative Lands for Miss Speyside, and I simply want to ask the Secretary whether he agrees or disagrees with that member, that whenever you are paid late, don't blame the public servants, blame the liar politicians. I am simply going to ask the member whether he agrees or disagrees with the position of the member for Palliative Lands for me, Speyside.
Assemblyman James.
Madam Presiding Officer, I'm bemused that this question is allowed. However, this is an unrelated matter. I cannot speak for the member for Palliative. Trevor James, I'm not in the habit of agreeing with people generally, so it matters not to me what Robinson says, what Hotchoy says, what Keith says, what whoever says. I form my own conclusion, and I have just answered the questions previously posed.
Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Question number 102 to Secretary Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, Assemblyman Trevor James.
101.
Sorry, 101. 101 to the Secretary of Tourism, Culture, Antiquities and Transportation, Councillor Tashia Burris.
Councillor Burris.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. As it relates to the major tourism and cultural festivals on the island hosted between January 2022 and January 15, 2024, namely National Carnival, Jazz Festival, Heritage Festival, Blue Food Festival, and Tobago Carnival, what is the outstanding amount owed by the Tobago Festivals Commission to Tobago service providers, suppliers, and cultural groups for each of the aforementioned festivals? Madam Presiding Officer, as it relates to major tourism and cultural festivals on the island hosted between January 2022 and January 15, 2024, namely National Carnival, Jazz Festival, Heritage Festival, Blue Food Festival, and Tobago Carnival, there are no outstanding payments owed by the Tobago Festivals Commission Limited to Tobago service providers for the following events: National Carnival 2022, Tobago Heritage Festival 2022, Blue Food Festival 2022, and Tobago October Carnival 2022. There are also no outstanding payments owed to Tobago service providers by the Tobago Festivals Commission Limited for the Heritage Festival 2023. The following are outstanding balances to date owed to Tobago service providers by the Tobago Festivals Commission Limited for major tourism and cultural festivals between January 2022 and January 15, 2024. So far, balances incurred for last year's staging or owing for National Carnival 2023 is $135,469. Outstanding balance for the Tobago Jazz Experience 2023 is $503,561.46. Outstanding balance for the Blue Food Festival 2023 is $48,202. And outstanding balance for the Tobago October Carnival 2023 is $2,545,967.43. Thank you.
Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, In follow-up, can the Secretary indicate when the payments, because notably Carnival and Jazz, which have been held early up in the earlier part of 2023. So when will the outstanding payments be made, Madam Presiding Officer?
Councillor Boris.
So as the Tobago Festivals Commission Limited receives its releases from the Division of Tourism, they have prioritized the oldest payments to be paid first. So they have recently received releases for the end of first quarter, and they cleared up the majority of outstanding payments they had for the older events. In this case, it would be National Carnival and the Jazz Experience. So those outstanding balances should be the first ones paid when they receive releases for second quarter.
Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, can the Secretary or does the Secretary wish to share a timeline when that will happen?
Councillor Boris.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to give a timeline as I don't have an exact date when releases would become available. We have done all that we can do in the division to submit our requests in a timely manner. So we are simply waiting on the releases to come, and when they do, these service providers would be paid as soon as.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Another follow-up. There has been a lot of complaints in terms of the payments to service providers and performers for the Tobago Heritage Festival. Is the Secretary in a position, 2023, is the Secretary in a position to indicate what is that outstanding balance?
Councillor Boris.
So I don't have that exact figure in front of me, Madam Presiding Officer, but to allay the concerns expressed by the minority, I have put on public record that the division's accounting department is working to clear up those payments by the end of this month.
Question 102, Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Question number 102 to the Secretary, Infrastructure, Quarries, Urban Development, Assemblyman Trevor James.
Assemblyman James.
Madam Presiding Officer, let me throw it a bit. There seems to be a lot of questions for the Secretary of Infrastructure today. The estimated cost as it relates to the Scarborough redevelopment plan, can the Secretary provide the following? A, what is the overall estimated cost of the project? Madam Presiding Officer, this question is premature. The project is still undefined, and therefore we cannot arrive at a project cost. The total expenditure inclusive of feasibility study, designs and other related expenses. To date, Madam Presiding Officer, we have issued one contract on the Scarborough redevelopment plan project. That contract went to J-Metrics. The contract payment terms were divided into two parts. TT dollars, $3,486,362.26, and US dollars, $424,948.26. Those are all the costs that has been assigned to the Scarborough Development Plan thus far.
Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, can the Secretary indicate what was the process, because the expenditure seemed to be quite large, in excess of $3 million. And with this level of expenditure, can the Secretary indicate what was the process that was used to engage the service provider for this particular project?
Assemblyman James.
Madam Presiding Officer, the Executive Council of the current THA took a decision to adopt the mandate of the PDP at the time as official government policy. Critical to that mandate was the Scarborough redevelopment plan. Therefore, the plan became official THA policy. the Executive Council took a decision to engage the designers of the Scarborough plan under sole select procurement methodology.
Minority Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, it is quite alarming to hear the process that was used to engage this contractor that to date would have expended over $3 million, Madam Presiding Officer.
Members, members, please allow for the minority councillor to do her follow-up question. Continue.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, as I was saying, it is quite alarming with this level of expenditure.
Is there a question, please?
Member, I would not tolerate this type of behavior. Please allow for the councillor to give her question. Minority Councillor, continue.
Thank you for your protection, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, there seems to be a problem with me reiterating the expenditure.
No. We would appreciate your question, please. Thank you.
So, Madam Presiding Officer, can the Secretary
Minority
Madam
Councillor.
Presiding Officer, is the Executive Council a procuring entity? Because based on what the Secretary outlined, there seemed to be no procurement process, and the policy or the mandate of the PDP cannot be deemed a process to just simply engage someone, Madam Presiding Officer.
Repeat the question, please. I didn't hear.
Is the Executive Council now a procuring agent?
Assemblyman James.
Madam Presiding Officer, we are in a place where history should be taught in schools, where we have just come out of an election 2 years ago, and we've come to the Division of Infrastructure, and we have found evidence that up to $700 million without any procurement process for
Members, the question was given to Assemblyman James. I don't think he needs any support to answer a question.
So I am amazed that, no, I'm not Fabregas, I'm amazed that the councillor has the audacity to ask such a question. However, I've said in my previous answer that the Division of Infrastructure engaged in a sole select procurement methodology.
It did not.
We have short-term memory loss in the House as well. Not only historical memory loss, short-term memory loss. We have to do better.
Wow.
Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, based on the response of the member is condemning some things that he would have a process that he thought was not an appropriate process. However, Madam Presiding Officer, is the member now confirming that they are engaging in a similar process that they condemned, well, at this moment? Is that what the member is saying, Madam Presiding Officer?
Can I have the question, please? I would let you all know that this is not a debate. Question and answer.
The question is, Madam Presiding Officer, is the member...
Minority Councillor, question, please.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Is the member condemning a previous process and is currently adopting the same process, Madam Presiding Officer, for the engagement of this company for this Scarborough redevelopment program is the process that was established under the last PNM administration, where the secretary spoke to soul selecting. He is engaging in that similar process as he described. Is he saying that he also is condemning his own process, or is he agreeing with the process of the last administration?
Minority Council, I just want one question. Just one question. As succinctly as possible. One question.
Is the member agreeing that the process under the last administration that he condemned is now the same process he's using for the engagement of this contractor?
Assemblyman James.
Respectfully, Madam Presiding Officer, I want to seek some clarity. When the councillor speaks of the process of the last administration, which projects are she referring to? Please. Or was this a general process that the last administration had, where all projects were like that? I want clarity, please, Madam Presiding Officer.
General question? Yes. Moving on. Minority Leader.
Madam Presiding Officer, question number 103 to the Secretary of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development.
Assemblyman James.
Madam Presiding Officer, being new to the House, new to politics, and new to the standing orders, I want to seek your interpretation of Standing Order 26.5, which reads, not more than 3 questions requiring an oral answer shall appear on the order paper in the name of the same member for the same day.
True.
I want to ask for an interpretation.
I tend to agree. I tend to agree.
No, what is that?
Not more than 3 questions could be afforded
No,
to.
that is for us. That is for us. We can is wrong person, not
Delia?
Secretary.
Delia?
No, is the wrong person. Is we can ask more than 3. Answer the question. We're running from questions. You take up the job. That's part of the job. You have to speak to the people. You're running from questions. I never see this. I say, I know you like to talk. I say you like enjoy. I say you like enjoy. You're afraid to come to the people at Tobago. This is where the work is, isn't it? You want some more water, my brother? Exactly. It's now we thought that they didn't come and answer the questions and keep asking for the floor. What is on the order paper has to be dispensed.
As per Standing Order 26.5, not more than 3 questions requiring an oral answer shall appear on the order paper in the name of the same member.
This is, in fact, the fourth question from you to us, to Assemblyman James. And we are also guided by the standing orders of this House, Standing Order 26-7. If the questions have not received an oral answer within the 45-minute time frame, they shall be put in writing within an hour's time to the member. So, Assemblyman James, please have your staff provide the minority leader with his answers within an hour's time, that is at 3:22 p.m. this afternoon.
Read Standing Order 26-7.
Please be so guided, Assemblyman James.
I don't know what I'm to be guided about, Madam Presiding Officer.
You are to present your answers to the minority within 1 hour's time at 3:22 in writing to the minority as per Standing Order 25-7.
Madam Presiding Officer, I can tell you now that is impossible and cannot be done.
I would remind members of this House that we are guided by the standing orders. I am sure all assemblymen are provided with competent staff to fulfill this request. 1 hour's time, Standing Order 25-7. Minority Leader, question 105.
Madam Presiding Officer, question 105 to the Secretary of Health, Wellness and Social Protection.
Assemblyman B. Israel.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Question 105. At the Division of Health, Wellness and Social Protection, the employment protocols that I met when I assumed office in December 2021 are the same employment protocols utilized now. This includes the process where all contract employment requires approval of the Executive Council in the first instance, and then approval of the Secretary for subsequent contract periods. Please note that contracts have a definite beginning and end. In this case, all of the information available to me as a Secretary was used to assist in determining whether the division should re-engage the officer in question. Please note, Madam Presiding Officer, that the inferences made within the body of the question do not accurately represent the information that was taken into account when making that decision. Madam Presiding Officer, I have refused to speak about this case publicly because I firmly believe that the information within an employee's personal file should remain confidential, as is written on the file jackets of those said personal files. As a result, Madam Presiding Officer, in an effort to protect the confidentiality of this particular employee, I simply wish to reiterate that the inferences as outlined in the question do not accurately reflect the conduct and performance of the former employee of the division. Thank you.
Minority Leader.
Madam Presiding Officer, just for clarity, because one of the inferences to which the Secretary is alluding to is the fact that the employee received a satisfactory performance appraisal, that is a fact, and the administrator recommended re-engagement, that is a fact. So in that context, doesn't that constitute ample justification for re-engagement?
I didn't hear her pinpoint an inference though. So
no, the question itself had the inference in it. The question therein, if you read the recital of the question, does have two important pieces of information. One, that the administrator recommended on file the rehiring, re-engagement of the worker, and the HR, he did indicate that he
Can I have the question, please, Minority Leader?
So I'm simply asking if, based on those two pieces of information, what was the justification for going against those recommendations?
Assemblyman B. Israel.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Kindly note, Madam Presiding Officer, that a recommendation is simply that, a recommendation, and a recommendation is simply that, a recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Minority Leader.
Just for clarity, because I'm hearing the Secretary is now saying that a recommendation is just a recommendation. So who in the division is responsible for hiring? Just for clarity.
Assemblyman B. Israel.
Madam Presiding Officer, I am not sure I understand the question, but let me outline the process. As I had indicated before.
I just want to
allow her to answer the question, please.
As I indicated before, the Executive Council is responsible for approving employment, contract employment in the first instance, and the Secretary is responsible for approving contract employment for further contractual engagements. So that is the process that I met, and that is the process that we are continuing.
Minority Leader, I'm going to allow you your final follow-up question because we have exceeded the 45 minutes for questions to Secretary.
So based on the explanation there, it is reasonable for one to accept that the Secretary does have a role in the hiring and...
Question, please.
So I just want to understand whether the Secretary still holds true to her word that is in the public domain based on her express report, that where she's saying by legal writ, that the Secretary doesn't hire. Because in this instance, I'm hearing her saying that she has a role to hire. But on written declaration, there's a newspaper headline, the Secretary doesn't hire. Where in the newspaper, it is say the Secretary is on record as saying that she does not hire anybody. So which one is it? Do you have a role in hiring or don't you have a role in hiring?
Assemblyman B. Israel.
Madam Presiding Officer, as it relates to contract employment within the Tobago House of Assembly, the Executive Council needs to provide initial approval for contract employment, and the Secretary needs to provide subsequent approval for contract employment.
Clerk.
engagement of the Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by secretaries or assistant secretaries, personal explanations, introduction of bills, motion relating to the business or sitting of the Assembly and moved by a secretary or assistant secretary, private members' business, motion.
Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, I stand before you today inspired by the profound words of Martin Luther King Jr., who reminded us that injustice anywhere is threat to justice everywhere. Today, as I reflect on the echoes of these words in the context of our beloved island of Tobago, it becomes evident that an injustice to the dedicated workers of TATCO reverberates as a threat to justice for all of Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, in the recent pages of our shared history from December 6, 2021 to present, an unprecedented wave of vicious, malicious, and vindictive attacks has targeted contract employees across various divisions, including but not limited to the Monitoring and Evaluation Unit, the Community Partnership Unit, CPEP, URP, YES Program, and now TATCO. Madam Presiding Officer, the fear of a THA employee waking up to the news that their position has been made redundant and their unit restructured, once an exception, has now become the norm under this heartless and uncaring administration. It is against this sad reality of despair and disappointment that the Minority Council has tabled this motion, which stands in my name. Madam Presiding Officer, it must not go unnoticed that while this administration has abandoned and betrayed its social contract with the people of Tobago, let it be known on this day, in this year of 2024, the People's National Movement via its 2 minority members in the Tobago House of Assembly have declared our commitment to stand with and stand in defense of the workers of TATCO and all employees of the Tobago House of Assembly as we protect Tobago's heritage and defend Tobago people. Accordingly, I am indeed humbled to move this motion that reads, whereas the Tobago Agribusiness Development Company Limited is a registered entity under the Division of Food Security, Natural Resources, the Environment and Sustainable Development of the Tobago House of Assembly, the company being formed in 2020 through the amalgamation of the Tobago Cassava Products Limited, Tobago Cold Storage and Warehouse Facility Limited, and the Fishing Processing Company of Tobago, all being former companies under the Tobago House of Assembly. And whereas TATCO became the successor company to the 3 companies named above, retained the services of all the employees and who were put to function in positions laid out in a new organizational structure approved for the operations of this new company with assumption of duties effective 1st October 2020, and whereas the workers were all dismissed, saving for a few security workers on 30th September 2023 in circumstances contrary to good industrial relation principles, practices, and procedures, be it resolved that this House seeks clarity on the decision made by the Board of Directors of TATCO and its line secretary to unceremoniously dismiss the employees of TADCO, and be it further resolved that this House advises the Board of Directors of TADCO and its line secretary to immediately take steps to remedy this grave injustice. Madam Presiding Officer, notwithstanding the content of today's motion, we on the minority side are committed to preserving the original intention of this motion by presenting a compelling discourse that delves beyond simply seeking clarity, but also outrightly reject the actions of TADCO and its board, and forcefully declare that such actions are unacceptable and an unfortunate injustice against the people of Tobago. Accordingly, I therefore wish to propose in my discourse amendments in keeping with the resolution that this House seeks clarity and rejects the decision taken by the Board of Directors of TADCO and its line secretary to unceremoniously dismiss the employees of TADCO. And I also wish to add a third resolution that this House urges the Executive Council to cease and desist from undertaking any such actions that would result in the psychosocial...
Minority Leader, I am sure you would have received correspondence from the clerk's office at my behest that what you are about to say was not allowed for an amendment. I am very certain of that. You could propose any other amendment, and I'm hoping that you would have submitted said amendment to the clerk's office. I have received none, so I am going to caution you moving forward to adhere to the standing orders of this House. I am going to caution you to adhere to the standing orders of this House. Continue.
Madam Presiding Officer, I stand so guided. Madam Presiding Officer, with your leave, permit me to provide the people of Tobago with a brief history of the Tobago Agribusiness Development Company, popularly known as TADCO. Madam Presiding Officer, the Tobago Agribusiness Development Company is an amalgam of three special purpose companies of the Tobago House of Assembly: the Fish Processing Company of Tobago, which manages the capital of Paradise and treats with fish longline fishing vessel. Then there's the cold storage and warehouse facility, which is situated at Shore Park and also houses a head office of TADCO. Madam Presiding Officer, there's also the Tobago Cassava Company Limited, which was a wholly owned enterprise of the THA, capitalizing on the popularity of the root vegetable cassava in food preparation. The company actively promoted the benefits of cassava, added value products, and its health attributes. Madam Presiding Officer, as early as 2016, the matter of the underperformance of these three special purpose companies engaged the attention of the then Orville London administration with a view of streamlining, integrating, and improving the operations of the three companies into a single, productive, and efficient entity to drive and facilitate Tobago's food production and food security thrust. Therefore, the merger was deemed critical to the agricultural sector on the island as it reduced duplication of efforts, created opportunities for synergies, efficiencies, and effective management and development of the sector. Madam Presiding Officer, the Executive Council, by minute number 171 dated May 20th, 2020 approved the establishment of the Tobago Agribusiness Development Company Limited. The company was subsequently incorporated on October 16, 2020 and officially launched in December 2020. Madam Presiding Officer, it is important to note that prior to the launch of TATCO in December of 2020, this was prefaced by a transparent restructuring process. And Madam Presiding Officer, at this point, I'd like to take the opportunity to share with the people of Tobago the approach and what underpinned the approach by the People's National Movement Administration. Madam Presiding Officer, this approach was a people-centered and employee-centered, employee-focused approach. And what the administration did is that they did not take upon themselves the role of being HR specialists or chief executioner. The Executive Council, and through the Division of Food Production at the time, engaged in a process of consultation, and that process of consultation involved hired professionals coming in, looking at the operations of the three companies, and in looking at the operations of the three companies, evaluating the companies, assessing the companies, and then preparing a document to treat with the organizational structure of the Tobago Agribusiness Development Company. Madam Presiding Officer, and in that consultation and planning phase, as I mentioned, the consultants were hired for advice on the new organizational structure. And interestingly, we had persons, and this is just to show Tobago the kind of transparent and magnanimous approach of the former administration. Because here it is, the administration onboarded a Tobago son with experience in that field, not caring for his politics of the day. And one of the persons who gave support to this transition was Mr. Gladstone Solomon, who I see is being utilized in the Division of Community Development as an advisor. So it tells us that he does have some level of capacity. And this proud Tobago son would have been part of the process from beginning to the very end, including the engagement of staff. Madam Presiding Officer, they also had persons in the person of Mr. Vassell Stewart of the Caribbean Agribusiness Development Company, also provided expert guidance to this transition and merging phase. And Madam Presiding Officer, there was a transition team. So this transition team was there, onboarded during the period of 2020 to ensure that there was a level of knowledge transfer going into the formation of the board, because what would have happened is that the majority of the persons who were part of the transition team and who had the institutional knowledge, they then became members of the TATCO board, so it allowed for a seamless transition. Madam Presiding Officer, one of the fundamental underpinnings of the transition was recognizing that at the end of the day, all of these companies had employees. All of these companies had persons who depended on these organizations for their income. And as a responsible administration, a caring administration, the People's National Movement ensured that none of those persons during the period of the merger and during the period of the transition lost their jobs. In fact, what would have happened in creating the organizational structure which was independent of the individuals, the administration at the time advised those working with the HR process to utilize as far as possible the employees within the system to be best fit and place them where they were best suitable. And Madam Presiding Officer, that ensured that not only was a new company created, but they protected and preserved the lives and livelihoods of those employees who depended on the former companies. Madam Presiding Officer, fast forward to today. We have a situation where employees who came out of that process, participated in the interview, participated in building TATCO to what it is today. These employees, on the first instance where their contracts have been expired, are now placed on the breadline. And they are placed on the breadline in a situation where it appears that, compared to the P&M process, consultants, experts treating with the matter, we asked the question today, which consultant assisted? As far as we understand, we've been told no consultant has been paid, so clearly all the decisions have been made by persons internally, and the question has to be asked because we are being told about a manpower audit. Who commissioned the audit? What was the capacity of the people to do the audit? If the manpower audit was outsourced, who paid for the audit? How much was paid for the audit? And at the end of the day, some of the excuses that we are hearing is that you really send home the people because you want to stagger the contract. And again, I just want to bring people back to the focus. The focus of the former administration was always about putting the workers first. Now you have a situation where you're being told that you have to stay home because we have an HR issue that we are trying to treat with, and it requires us to stagger your contract. Well, Madam Presiding Officer, there are sufficient HR practices out there that deals with how you treat with staggering contracts without adversely affecting the employee. And therefore, it is quite reprehensible that in a situation where you have persons coming out of COVID, in a situation where you already have a declining economy, in a situation where you have rising inflation, in a situation where Tobago has limited private sector opportunities, that an administration, that a division, and that a board would take the decision to unceremoniously remove 60 Tobagonians from earning an income. In one go, 60 persons sent home. And Madam Presiding Officer, if that is not the definition of heartless, uncaring, I honestly don't know. Because, Madam Presiding Officer, there are some real stories, real life stories about some of the persons that have been sent home. And the thing is, Tobago is a small place, so perhaps some of us know some of the real stories out there. I can tell you of one. I was at FCB recently, and while coming out from the ATM, someone jokingly made a joke with me about me sharing what I just took out from the ATM. And I took it as I honestly thought they were joking. And then she said, no, I'm serious, because she said, I was one of those workers who was working at TATCO. Said, and right now I'm no longer working there, haven't received an income, at the time had not yet received gratuity. I have a mortgage, I have a daughter overseas studying, and I absolutely don't know what to do. And Madam Presiding Officer, I wondered to myself there and then, when the decision was being made to send home these workers, when the decision was being made to terminate these workers, did these people really think about these workers? Did they think about their families? Did they think about their commitments? Did they even think about them at all? And so you have that happening in one breath. But then you have a chairman that is telling you, in one breath he's saying that perhaps you had employees who, some of them weren't qualified for the position, but I know there's something as tacit kind of learning where people over time acquire skills, and not because you don't have this certification, you have the experience to do the job. And then you have the chairman coming back and also saying that these are some of the best workers he has. The workers are excellent. So if the workers are so good, if the workers are getting satisfactory appraisals, if the workers would have contributed in such a way to build the company, why then would you take such a harsh decision to send home these workers? If this is how a board, if this is how a division, if this is how an administration will reward good workers, I don't want to see how they'll treat bad ones. Because if I'm a good worker, if I would have done my part, if I would have come to work on time, I would have sat behind my desk, I would have ensured that what had to be sold, what had to be prepared. And you are saying to me, when you evaluate my work, that the position I held, I executed my functions, but at the end of the day, no, go home. Then I absolutely don't know how again to view this kind of action. It is heartless. It is heartless. Madam Presiding Officer, I ask the people of Tobago to compare the PNM's approach to treating with the terms of engagement of the TATCO employees then, in contrast to the high-handed, heartless discontinuation and non-renewal of the employees' contract adopted by this administration now. As I said before, the PNM ensured it protected and preserved the lives and livelihood of TATCO employees, while this administration has abandoned and destroyed them. Madam Presiding Officer, the PNM, during the consultation with the employees, fulfilled its commitment to the employees that no employee would lose employment. However, this administration has reneged on its word to contract employees that one would not be sent home during their tenure. From then to now, over 500 Tobagonians have been sent home and placed on the breadline. 500. Madam Presiding Officer, what is even more unfortunate is that many of the workers at TATCO, like so many other Tobagonians, bought the PDP's tagline, "Let we fix this," hook, line and sinker, and voted for the PDP. Some of these very same TATCO workers were activists, worked to ensure that they got you all in office, believing that their lives would be made better, only to realize that they were duped and their lives have actually gotten worse. So imagine working, building, But this shouldn't be, because the member that is now standing by himself could attest to that. That after you work with these people and you build with them, they have a way of kicking you out. And this is what they have done to some of these TATCO workers who would have supported, believed. You all talked about bread and butter issues, and they thought that bread and butter meant sustaining employment, creating employment, maintaining employment. I am sure they never imagined that bread and butter would be no sugar, no milk, no bread, no butter. And that is the reality. Madam Presiding Officer, as I said, the justification for this inhumane and unlawful decision to constructively dismiss the employees of TATCO is nothing short of ridiculous, incredulous, stupendous, and downright foolish. Madam Presiding Officer, as I said, the chairman, in one breath, this chairman is saying that workers were unsuited for the positions they occupied. Yet in the same breath, the chairman is also saying, you know, it have people who overqualified, it have people who went and get their masters. And the point is, even if you have persons who may not have the qualifications that you believe they should have for the positions, a caring, empowering administration, you know what they would do on a board? Would work with the employees, would provide. This is modern HR practice. You don't fire people because they lack. You build people up, you empower them, you provide the resources, you provide the training so they can self-actualize. You don't take away their bread and put them, now they can't provide for them, their families. You don't do that. You hold their hands and you walk with them. You lift them. Because I don't know, it seems like only you all want to be up in the sky. But I know a rising tide gathers all boat, but all are alone sailing. And everybody else in Tobago joining. We joined in. So much family suffering. People can't get a grant. People can't get jobs. And instead of creating jobs, you reducing jobs. Madam Presiding Officer, another excuse being proffered is one about the wage bill, and I want to treat with this real quick. You're hearing that basically, you know, the wage bill is too onerous on the company and too burdensome. But Madam Presiding Officer, you know, this same company spent or facilitated a tournament, a gambling tournament, for over $150,000. So you can't pay the workers, you don't want to pay the workers, but a company that should be producing food for people to eat, fighting up gambling down in a food hub that should have been selling food. And if this is not misdirection, misalignment, and a board that has just lost its way, I don't know what is. Madam Presiding Officer, you're saying that it is too onerous to pay the people who are building the company. But Madam Presiding Officer, do you know that this company paid over $100,000 up at Low for people to build a stage to dance cocoa? And you know what happened? 2 weeks later, the stage started to fall apart, it rotten. $100,000 this TATCO paid for we to dance cocoa up in Low. but you're sending home staff because you can't pay a bill of 500,000 a month. Madam Presiding Officer, do you know that this company, Tobago, received a bill for over $95,000, not to build desks, not to build chairs, but to move some chairs in the food hub from one side to the next side, over $95,000? Madam Presiding Officer, do you know as we speak right now, on who?
Remember, he didn't call a name. I'm sorry, that doesn't apply.
Somebody in Tobago.
It doesn't apply. But you would have your time to respond to his presentation. Minority Leader, continue.
Madam Presiding Officer, do you know as we speak, and I challenge and I invite my good friend, the Secretary, for us after this motion is done, let us take a walk. We could walk or we could drive down by the cold storage and let us visit the cold storage. Because do you know, as we speak right now, there are a number of chickens rotting away and fish rotting away down there, taking up precious good space down at Tobago, and I'm willing to go with the member and let us visit and let us make sure that they clean up the place so the place could smell good and smell nice and be all right. Madam Presiding Officer, do you also know that while Tobago is laying off workers, that there's some company being formed in the Division of Agriculture, and that company that is being formed is basically himself unto himself, because in the company, as a deputy director, do you know it is the administrator, as a deputy chairman of the company that is being formed, and perhaps the secretary she will have a time to clarify. But I'm asking the question whether the administrator is any kind of director, any kind of deputy chairman on any company that is involved in the Division of Agriculture. And do you also know that the management accountant, the person who also, so you have the accounting officer who's supposed to provide overall oversight in the division, also providing and perhaps receiving additional payment right in the division. If that is not a conflict of interest, I don't know what is. And then the other person that dealing with the monies, the management accountant, perhaps was or is earmarked to be the CEO of the same company. So, Madam Presiding Officer, so while you have this mismanagement happening in Tobago, and while the workers, the hard-working workers, the people, the only people who doing what they're supposed to do at Tobago and doing it properly, they are being punished. But this runaway board doing what they want, this board where it appears, and perhaps again, is the chairman involved in sole selecting suppliers for maintenance? Who does the contracting? Who calls their preferred? Who is the person that calls and acquires and procures services down at Tobago? Who is the person and what is the process? What is the procurement process down at Tobago? Is it that a chairman is so empowered to call contractors to provide maintenance service? I don't know. And if so, what are the protocols? What is the guiding principles? What is the standard operating procedures down there? What is the strategic plan? What is happening with the packing house? What is happening with the idea to create down at the Esplanade this lovely facility so that persons coming off the cruise ship can come and sit down and dine and have authentic Tobago products down at the facility down on the Esplanade? What is happening with that? Madam Presiding Officer, it seems that this board is more focused on terminating the employees who would have built the company than actually doing the work to build the company, to earn revenue so that they can in fact retain their staff. It seems that this board is misfocused. They have lost their focus because, as I said, they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to convert what should have been a place for wholesale farming so that persons could just as how when you go in Trinidad, you could go and get your products in one place in bulk and then retail. So that spot down at Shaw Park should have been there to provide support for farmers as a wholesale farming, a farmers market, and for our craft people, craftsmen and so. That has been converted to basically I would say a ghost food hub because you're only seeing food on Saturdays.
Minority, you have 5 minutes.
Right, and you spent over 100,000. You have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars down there to create this food hub. You have to spend money to maintain this food hub for people to just come and eat food one day, and then when you don't have nothing else to sell, you are gambling, you are fetting, everything else happening except food production. Everything else misaligned, misfocused, mismanagement. And that is what is passing. And the poor employees of TADCO are the ones who have to carry the brunt of the expense for the mismanagement and misfocus and misalignment of this misfit of a board. Madam Presiding Officer, as I wind up, as I conclude, it is clear that Peter is paying for Paul, and while Paul sits high and while Paul sits mighty, the unfortunate but hard-working TADCO workers are left broke and they are left empty. Madam Presiding Officer, there's a saying that birds that fly high must come down to die. And today, you all are having your time. You have the power, you have the authority to dismiss the TADCO workers. But like night follow day, there will be a time when the TADCO workers would have their say, and they also would have an opportunity to rehire or retire the persons who are now responsible for them living on the edge. Madam Presiding Officer, on that note, I wish to again reinforce that it is not too late. You all may have made a mistake with monitoring evaluation unit. You all would have made a mistake with CPU. You all would have made a mistake with CPEP. But you still have some time to undo this grave injustice. I'm asking my colleague on the other side to liaise with your board, to have the conversation, and to ensure that these workers does not fall prey to the incompetence of this TADCO board. Madam Presiding Officer, On this note, I ask that the workers, in simple, plain language, put the people back in their work. I conclude. Thank you. Before. I beg to move, sorry.
Finance Councillor. Agribusiness Development Company Limited, TADCO, is a registered entity under the Division of Food Security, Natural Resources, the Environment and Sustainable Development of the Tobago House of Assembly. The company being formed in 2020 through the amalgamation of the Tobago Cassava Products Limited, Tobago Cold Storage and Warehouse Facility Limited, and the Fishing Processing Company of Tobago, all being former companies under the Tobago House of Assembly. And whereas TADCO became the successor company of the 3 companies named above, retained the services of all their employees, and who were put to function in positions laid out in a new organizational structure, approved for the operations of this new company with assumption of duties effective 1st October 2020. And whereas the workers were all dismissed, saving a few security workers on 30th September 2023 in circumstances contrary to good industrial relation principles, practices, and procedures. Be it resolved that this House seeks clarity on the decision made by the Board of Directors of TADCO and its line secretary to unceremoniously dismiss the employees of TADCO, and be it further resolved that this House advises the Board of Directors of TADCO and its line secretary to take immediate steps to remedy this grave injustice. Assemblyman Charles Pantin, you may now join the debate.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, as per Standing Order 42.7, I ask for permission to read during my presentation at some points. Yeah? Madam Presiding Officer, I stand to respond to this motion under the following conditions: that I do not respond to anything that can prevent workers from seeking legal recourse that could be lodged in any court of law or legal entity that exists to protect the rights of workers to challenge or appeal decisions. Madam Presiding Officer, allow me to present some important background information so that all of Tobago, including the members of this Honorable House, could fully understand the direction that the Tobago Agribusiness Development Company, TADCO, is heading. I am sure that Tobago would understand the reasons for the restructuring, how it was done, and I will give a systematic comparison of what happened before and after millions of taxpayers' dollars were spent to fund 3 failed companies for over 10 years. The Tobago Cassava Products Limited Company, TCPL, the Tobago Cold Storage and Warehouse Facility Limited, TCOSWAF, and the Fish Processing Company of Tobago, FIPCOT. Madam Presiding Officer, when I assumed office, I impressed upon the entire division, including its companies, that agriculture is a science and a business.
Right.
Not a purse for the or a bank for the boys club. Yeah? With this understanding, I want to thank TADCO for continuously engaging in projects that address the daily needs and emergency situations that occur on the island of Tobago. Since the start of TADCO's Poultry Contract Farm Initiative in 2022, TADCO not only created employment for over 60 farm entrepreneurs throughout the island of Tobago, but also supplied franchises, including other local businesses, with meat. When there were issues with the Cabo Star, commodities were unable to be transported from Trinidad to Tobago. Nevertheless, Tobago was able to supply itself with all its poultry needs from local poultry farmers. Yes, This was the first successful contract farming initiative to take place in Tobago, where farmers got contracts to supply local chickens to Tobago. From September 2022 to December 2023, Tobago would have sold 1.1 million or 15,891 pounds worth of chicken to the local market. This is the kind of money that stayed in Tobago as a result of poultry raised in Tobago, and this created economic opportunities spurred right here in Tobago. Farmers could buy books for their school children, groceries, and invest money into fixing their homes. Also, Madam Presiding Officer, it is important for me to highlight another reason why Tobago should continue supporting initiatives that can result in Tobago feeding itself. A few days ago, the Department of Agriculture in the Philippines banned imported poultry products from California and Ohio in the US amid the outbreak of the avian flu. Their Agriculture Secretary stated that the rapid spread of H5N1, highly pathogenic avian influenza in the United States in a short period of time since its first laboratory detection necessitates a wider coverage of trade restrictions to prevent the entry of HPAI virus and protect the health of the local poultry populations. Now, with this information, I am certain that the minority leader could appreciate that the well-being of Tobagonians should take precedence, and the minority leader could appreciate the direction TADCO is going. Now COVID-19 has resurfaced with an even stronger variant. Should restrictions for Tobago be implemented, we should be able to feed ourselves via TADCO and its partnerships with farm entrepreneurs.
Yes.
At this point, I would now ask the Minority Council to take out their pens and paper so that they can learn something about this line secretary's attempt at good governance. Madam Presiding Officer, let me borrow a statement made on Facebook by a Facebook friend. It seems to me that the minority is at odds with varying realities.
Indeed.
So you will no longer need to stutter after you hear this. I will use understandable, comprehensible, plain, transparent, and crystal clear language so that the minority does not continue to mislead right-thinking Tobagonians. Madam Presiding Officer, the role of the line secretary in this matter of TADCO was to appoint the board of directors. The entire board of directors was apprised of several pillars of good governance, of which transparency, accountability, fairness, stakeholder engagement, and compliance form part of those pillars. Madam Presiding Officer, I'm not seeing the minority councillors taking notes. I hope that he too should note all the nonsense that took place in the past by his PNM colleagues. In order to build, no, hush your mouth. You know you're accustomed to hearing that. You shut up. You will not disturb me. You have no right to disturb. You're accustomed to that, Madam Presiding Officer. His PM usually treat them that way.
Yes, he was accustomed to say that in any forum.
Honorable members, this is still the House. This is still the House. Members, please continue to demonstrate honorable behavior within the House. A Assemblyman Pantin, you may continue uninterrupted. Thank you.
My apologies, Madam Presiding Officer. Let me break down TADCO's approach under this new administration into bite-sized pieces for the Minority Council.
Many bite-sized.
When TADCO fell under my purview, the company was not financially stable. Carrying 69 staff members, the company received a monthly subvention of $500,000 TT dollars, with a wage bill of $667,000. I'm into science, Madam Presiding Officer, but I understand money.
Right.
Can the Minority Council explain this? No funds were available for maintenance of buildings, equipment, fuel, stationery and supplies, or for investment into any other initiative. The board of directors had to manage TADCO after inheriting significant debts. For example, a light bill of over $1 million and all the equipment, machines and storage completely run down, including the Tobago's vessel, the capital of paradise.
Don't talk about that.
I want the Minority Council to identify anywhere in the world where 3 failed companies were merged and all the staff from each of these failed companies were merged into one company. So let me outline a report that we could find, because we couldn't find a lot.
Indeed.
But we found the report of why these companies failed. The Tobago Cassava Products Limited Company failed due to lack of processing infrastructure, very weak supply capability of SMEs on which the company depended for supplies, inadequate policy and strategic approach to agribusiness development, inadequate and high cost of raw material supplies, low level of product development. And the net loss per year, so we're going to take it from 2009. Net loss per year in 2009, over $144,000. 2010, net loss per year, over $633,000. 2011, net loss per year, over $612,000. Now these are reports from your colleagues. 2012, over $845,000 net loss per year. 2013, over $883,000 net loss per year. 2014, 1.1 million, over 1.1 million net loss per year. 2015, over $1.1 million net loss per year. Now this didn't come from me or us.
Right.
Total net loss, approximately 5.23 million TT dollars from 2009 to 2015. So let's move over to FITCOT. Give it fancy acronym, FITCOT. In that report presented by your colleagues, failed again. No strategic plan, no clear intention to pursue mandate for commercial fish processing, no performance measuring mechanisms, no formal policies, procedures, and internal control, lack of expertise in fishing fleet management, failure to meet statutory financial commitments like VAT and annual returns.
Wow.
Net loss per year, so I'll use from 2014 and 2015. Over $3.4 million net loss per year. 2015, over $3.1 million per year. Net loss per year. So total net loss under FITCOT alone, $6.6 million, 2014 to 2015. 2014 to 2015, $6.6 million, taxpayers' money. Tico Swaf.
I'm not popular, I feel that way.
Tico Swaf failed again. From your reports, inadequate electrical supply, deteriorated cold storage infrastructure, inadequate commercial space for rental, inadequate fleet of refrigerated trucks, inadequate linkages and synergy with other divisions. Net loss per year for TICO SWAF, we're going to start from 2012.
Yes, ma'am.
Over $858,000 net loss per year. 2013, over $1 million net loss per year. And they wasn't stopping it. They was just going on and on, doing nothing.
Yes.
In 2014, over $1 million in net losses per year. 2015, over $1.6 million net loss per year. Total net loss just for TICO SWAF alone, $4.59 million TT dollars.
Cheers.
All three companies.
Yes.
You want to know what's the total?
Yes, ma'am. Let me know that.
In net losses,
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah.
$16.42 million TT dollars.
All the poor people to be go get food.
Now this report was prepared and submitted to them. This is their report.
Right.
They didn't hide this one.
Right.
So we got this one. Reference to the Executive Council minute that he referenced earlier. Same minute,
Yes.
Number 171 of May 2020, passed by the then PNM administration, made no reference to the capital of Paradise or the organizational structure that was utilized for its management. As a matter of fact, under the then PNM administration, no member of the public knew the persons hired to manage the capital of Paradise, the positions the staff held, the salaries paid, the size of fish catch per annum, or revenues made yearly.
Yes.
The cost of repairs, the cost that we paid during our time, amounted to $545,000. And this vessel was out of operation for 5 years. 5 years parked up wherever, God alone knows.
Right.
Tobago lost out on the opportunity. You see why I had to ask him, I had to treat him like how the PNM treated him, not listening. Tobago lost out on the opportunity to make over $1.4 million US dollars, over that 5 year period where the boat was parked up by somebody, we don't know who. And that's just based on what we are able to make now with the vessel. In 2023, we made US $288,000 US dollars in revenue, after you calculate all the expenses. Some board minutes, contracts, and some documentation to reveal the history of the company were non-existent. And that in itself is a classic case of misbehavior in public office. Since this made continuity of certain projects impossible. And that is why I can speak about
Minority Leader, please allow for the member.
One of the
member,
new overseers,
Assemblyman Pantin, 1 moment please. Minority Leader, you had 40 minutes, most of which were uninterrupted. Please allow for the member to make her presentation. Thank you. Continue, Assemblyman Chasman.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Maybe you're too subtle. They're accustomed to being rough up. One of the things the new overseers of the company expected was to understand the full history of the company. This is a public company, and the previous board of directors should have known of their responsibility to be accountable to the public. What is there to hide? All company documents should have been stored in a fireproof safe for future referencing and auditing. And today, the board and the CEO cannot provide history on some matters prior to us assuming office. Minority Council, I'm sure you can ask your friends to hand over some of the missing minutes and contracts. Madam Presiding Officer, a full report came to me on the status of the flour making equipment. There was equipment purchased in China through a consultant named Rex Collymore. And everybody could go on Google and Google the name, do a search, Rex Collymore. I didn't make up that name like how he making up the lies, eh? To date, some of the equipment are not in Tobago.
Members, Assemblyman Charles Pantin, I would caution you to use parliamentary language while making your presentation. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. To date, some of the flour equipment are not in Tobago, and complete manuals have not been found or made available to operationalize these equipment. I was told that whatever manuals are here are written in Chinese. And when representatives from TADCO met with Mr. Collymore, he refused to give TADCO his consultancy contract and advised to be paid to bring in the rest of the equipment and to provide interpretation.
What? It's crazy people.
Also, there was a report of a state-of-the-art processing plant where all the rooms were ozonated with automatic doors located at Goldsboro. When a team from TADCO visited, the scope was totally different from what was reported. As a matter of fact, no contract could have been found for works conducted on the building. And alongside this building, an empty shell stood at the site without a ceiling or a roof.
Wow.
However, the cost demanded by the contractors exceeded $6.7 million. Wow. But this is just pocket change for them. TADCO's board wrote to the TTPS in March 2022 requesting assistance to locate missing minutes and contracts and other important documents. I guess they were occupied with other matters.
Yes.
Madam Presiding Officer, can the minority tell us where the vessel was all this time prior to us assuming office?
Right.
Can the minority tell us what was done with the money made by this vessel? Can the minority ask its PNM colleagues who appointed the previous board of directors to assist this current administration with sourcing contracts and other important documents needed to provide accountability to the people of Tobago? Imagine in these times when we need to pursue food security, the Minority Council is not acknowledging the seriousness of the misdeeds executed by previous appointees who should have been seeking the interests of Tobagonians. Indeed. The minority can only quote what this current administration achieved when it repaired the vessel, employed able-bodied seamen from Tobago, and started to export fish to North America. The crew is led by a Tobagonian captain, and the entire crew is a Tobagonian crew. The crew is paid based on catch, and since it set sail, the revenue after all expenses in 2022 is US $201,000. And you will see that this increased, because all their numbers decreased.
Right. That's a good point.
The revenue in 2023, it moved from 201 to 288,000 US dollars. So it's up we going, better we get in.
Yes.
Ascending, man, not descending.
Locally, fish is supplied to the school feeding program and to local fish processors. Sometimes the vessel will dock right at the fish facility there in Scarborough and supply meals to the general public, and live demonstration on vessel operations for those young aspiring vessel crew members who want to own their own mother vessels. After hearing of this minority council, take out your pens and paper and write this down as transparency and accountability. Madam Presiding Officer, the Executive Council Minute 171 of May 20, 2020, passed by the then PNM administration, ensured that employees got no contracts in the new arrangement. It did not address any human resource issue. For example, there are incidents of junior staff who were receiving higher salaries than senior staff,
Yes.
which brought much distress to honest and hard-working Tobagonians.
Yes.
It was reported that qualified staff who were not receiving correct salaries became demotivated, and that led to depression, which would obviously impact work performance.
Indeed.
In the interest of good governance, the board reported that it engaged in a series of stakeholder consultations with staff to apprise them of the need to possess qualifications for particular jobs, of which some individuals did pursue certificates. Another unusual occurrence was the hiring of all the staff at the same time, which led to all contracts coming to an end at the same time. And it is important to note that it is this administration that ensured that all staff received contracts to which they could qualify for gratuity. Any proper human resources practitioner would know how to stagger employment to allow for continuity of the company. After the previous companies were dissolved, staff were paid off, so they were fully compensated for their services. Their new and first contracts were given by this administration, and after this administration inherited the staff with all the irregularities, so they were just hanging in the wind of uncertainty. Correct? You see, you're asking for propaganda, things for propaganda, but you ain't getting the truth.
Indeed.
After being given their first contract under the newly formed company, no contracts were terminated during their tenure. So I'll repeat that. After being given their first contract, write it down, yes, I seen your pen working. After being given their first contract under the newly formed company, no contracts were terminated during their tenure, but came to a natural end, just as all contracts come to a natural end in all divisions and companies across the Tobago House of Assembly. Their gratuities were paid in record time, and job vacancies were advertised in the newspaper during the restructuring exercises. Persons in the public space also got an opportunity to apply for jobs, which they believed they were qualified for as well. Or they had a combination of qualifications and experience. Minority Council, keep writing and write this down and make note of this. This is called stakeholder engagement, fairness and compliance. For continuity of the company's operations, 40 out of the 69 staff members were retained until the process of re-engagement was completed. 40. I'll repeat it.
Yes, please.
For our honorable member. See why I said, right? He's at odds with varying realities.
Well,
40 out of the 69 staff members were retained until the process of re-engagement was completed. How can a company like TADCO be run only on a few security officers?
it don't make sense.
With such massive projects happening. Even in the animal kingdom, the smartest animal is always used to lead the pack. The minority had a very close knowledge that the police visited TADCO in the same way they visited other divisions and companies recently, inquiring about hiring practices. Is the minority concerned at all about the hiring practices as of November 2021? There was a staff member who submitted his curriculum vitae as having qualifications from Egypt. But to date, no evidence of this certificate was found. And TADCO's human resource staff have been requesting the submission of this certificate for over a year. Others reapplied as having CXC qualifications, which could not be verified based on non-submission. An accountant submitted as...
Member, you have 3 minutes.
As possessing ACCA credentials, and this could not be verified based on non-submission. As such, it is up to this administration to ensure that we are compliant with our hiring practices, even though the then PNM administration got to hire who they want, qualified or not, for votes. Apparently back then there were no consequences for hiring persons who held no qualifications for their jobs. We don't have that luxury. Police come in. So Tobagonians who sacrificed to acquire certificates had to face a system that made no provisions for them. So they had to steal more filter in whenever they could. In light of the inherited situation, TADCO worked to build capacity, increase productivity, and ensure safety by providing training in customer service, defensive driving, payment of medical for food badges. Imagine people down there don't even have food badge. Training of security in recording incidents and report writing, and TADCO gave staff time to register for other courses. TADCO is currently arranging forklift training and training on board the Capital of Paradise for young entrants. To date, 50 have been hired, 42 on the compound and 8 on the Capital of Paradise. And they will be given 3-year contracts which will enhance their creditworthiness. Compensation packages and positions held by staff are consistent with their qualifications and experience. There was transparency and due diligence in all aspects of the restructuring process. Madam Presiding Officer, I want to close this piece because I want to address some of the nonsense he said earlier. I want to end by pointing out that the culture of TADCO has changed. I am unsure if the minority is arguing today that TADCO should go back to making a loss. Is the minority council asking us to allow TADCO to go back to being unproductive? I am proud to report that this current executive and the board of TADCO.
Assemblyman Pantin, your time has expired. Assemblyman B. Israel.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I beg to move that the member be allowed an additional 10 minutes of speaking time.
Honorable members, as per Standing Order 52, the question put is that 10 minutes of additional speaking time be given to the Honorable Member, Assemblyman Charles Pantin, to conclude her presentation. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Please continue, Assemblyman Charles Pantin.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I am proud to report to all the honorable members of this House that this current executive and the board of TADCO, they are not walking around with checkbooks and writing checks without following proper procurement procedures. Is the minority arguing that TADCO should return to that? I want to address, Madam Presiding Officer, what the minority alluded to earlier. As TADCO paying for an all-force tournament. Now my father was an outstanding member of an all-force club. And we have a lot of people in our communities. They come together, it is a social event. And they put up their money to keep these events. So you can tell that he's far removed from the community.
Indeed.
Because people who know all fours that's pay for itself. Nobody had to fund the all fours tournament, and no money from TADCO was paid for that all fours tournament. Yeah?
You see, my person running things at loss.
The stage at $100,000 and the call, all of these things, they are not true.
Right.
You are at odds with varying realities.
Indeed.
And it is time that you come to this honorable house with accurate information.
Indeed.
And stop insulting the intelligence of Tobagonians. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Councillor Williams or? She already made her presentation. You could clarify in your minority leader. You can clarify in your wrap-up.
No, Madam Presiding Officer, it's just to you, Madam Presiding Officer.
Councillor Williams or?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I also thank the leader of this team, Chief Secretary Farley Chavez Augustine, for allowing me the privilege to be a part of his team. Madam Presiding Officer, I rise to contribute to the motion that is before this Honorable House. And I want to preface my contribution by saying, like my colleague, Assemblyman Natisha Charles Pantin, I speak knowing very well that any individual who considers himself or herself an aggrieved worker has the privilege of taking such grievance to various places under law in this land. Madam Presiding Officer, I have read paragraph 1 of the motion that is before this House. And I want to take I have taken particular note of a word, amalgamation. And the motion reads that whereas the Tobago Agri Business Development Company Limited, TADCO, is a registered entity under a particular division of the THA, the company being formed in 2020 through the amalgamation of the Tobago Cassava Products Limited, Tobago Cold Storage and Warehouse Facility Limited, and the Fish Processing Company of Tobago, all being former companies under the THC. Amalgamation, Madam Presiding Officer. But I said to this House, Madam Presiding Officer, no so the thing go. Madam Presiding Officer, and not so it happen. When one speaks about amalgamation, the notion is that 2 or more companies have been combined to form a completely new entity. It is a distinct form of a merger. But Madam Presiding Officer, this is not what happened in the case of the formation of the Tobago Agribusiness Development Company Limited. Executive Council Minute number 171 of May 20th, 2020 approved the dissolution of the 3 previously mentioned companies. Dissolution, in accordance with the voluntary winding up process as outlined in the Companies Act, Chapter 8101 of the Laws of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Act number 35 of 1995, as so amended. So the companies were dissolved. They were made defunct. They no longer exist. So you cannot amalgamate or combine what doesn't exist. It is impossible to combine what does not exist. Impossible. Contained in the same aforementioned Executive Council Minute was the approval for the incorporation and operationalization of a new limited liability company to be named the Tobago Agribusiness Development Company Limited. The mandate so given by the Executive Council was that TADCO should lead the development of the agribusiness sector in Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, whereas the Executive Council minute gave precise direction concerning the composition of the board, 9 members, a CEO should be hired, the transfer of plant and machinery and equipment and cash and land and buildings. No mention was made in this covering document. No mention of the most valuable asset of any organization, the human resource. Of all the workers under the 3 now dissolved companies to be terminated, was the service of the workers to be preserved and transferred to the new entity. It should be noted, though, that at the time the 3 companies were wound up, the workers were employed under a 3-year contract effective November 1st, 2019 to October 31st, 2022. Now the winding up took place in 2020 in the midst of a valid contract period. Madam Presiding Officer, what followed was that the employment of all the workers under those 3 previous companies were deemed to be terminated. Who gave this directive? Unknown. It was not contained in the Executive Council minute of May 20th, 2020. If it was a decision taken by the then Board of Directors, it is also unknown, because no minutes of meetings can be found at the offices of TADCO. None. What I can say to this House, Madam Presiding Officer, is that a prorated contract gratuity was quantified for each worker to cover the period November 1st, 2019 to September 30th, 2020. Paid in full. Prorated contract. So you cannot pay workers, you cannot quantify contract gratuity for a period and pay to those workers and still consider those workers to be employees of a new entity. Madam Presiding Officer, allow me to share with this House, to share with Tobago and those beyond our shores some insight into the rationale for the pursuit of the strategic change in 2020. And I want the minority to listen. I read from paragraph 10 of the note to the Executive Council. These companies and entities, though under one division, continue to operate as disconnected silos with various levels of operational inefficiencies, poor performance, and significant financial losses, and have been unable to have any meaningful impact on the development of the sector. Reasons for this unacceptable performance are inadequate policy and strategic approach to agribusiness development, total THA ownership and management of commercial operations, low level of THA and people expectation. So if they have a low level of expectation, what are they created for? Low management accountability, low worker productivity, inadequate and high costs of raw material supplies, low level of product development, weak marketing, high overheads. This was the rationale placed before the Executive Council by itself to guide the process to dissolve 3 companies and create a new entity. You know, when I read this, it reminded me of a calypso years ago that says telco poops. Clearly, we can probably ascribe the same. Madam Presiding Officer, it is implied also in this motion that TADCO is a successor company. This argument by the minority leader has already been laid bare by my colleague, Assemblyman Natisha Charles Panty. Madam Presiding Officer, like Ralphie, the known groundsman at the Queen's Park Oval, the minority leader has prepared the wicket for the Farley Chavez Augustine-led team to bat this afternoon. And bat we will. All nonsensical rhetoric will be clinically and decisively dispatched to the boundary today. Over the boundary. Madam Presiding Officer, the retrenchment of the services of all employees, put to function in positions laid out in a new organizational structure approved for the operations of TADCO with effect from October 1st, 2020. By whom was this supposedly new organizational structure approved? It certainly wasn't approved by the Executive Council. And again, I say, the decisions, the recorded decisions of the then Board of Directors of TADCO, is it safe to say they have vanished into thin air? But clearly, they have not been kept at the division. Madam Presiding Officer, in August 2020, the then chairman of the Board of Directors of TADCO issued letters of offer for employment at TADCO for a 3-year period effective October 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2023. The letters of offers included this condition. 2, the term of employment shall be for a period of 3 years, commencing from your date of assumption of duty, subject to the satisfactory completion of a 6-month probationary period and satisfactory performance assessments conducted in accordance with TADCO policy thereafter. Now, if you're talking about successor company, a letter of offer cannot include this clause, because a successor company tells you that you are preserved and you move over as you are. A successor company should not be making you an offer of employment and telling you that you are going to be treated as a probationer for 6 months, and then I will assess you off at the end of the 6-month period, and you better pass with flying colors, otherwise outside for you. This is what is implied here. It also says termination. Notwithstanding the above, management may terminate your appointment by giving 1 month's notice in writing or paying 1 month's salary in lieu thereof. This document is an offer of employment. It is not intended and shall not be construed as a contract proposal and or contract of employment. You are required to respond in writing to this offer within 7 days of your receipt of it. Failure to do so will be an indication of your refusal to accept the offer. So how could there be in a motion the implied underlying tone that persons were retained, full staff? But we're seeing otherwise. And these letters were signed by the chairman of the board. The chairman of the board, not a CEO, not an HR person, not a general manager, the chairman of the board. Then chairman of the board. Then, but it's a 2020, so we ain't going to tie up. Right? And we talk about full retention of people clearly into a new organizational chart. No, mister, we batting well today. Now tell me further, which organization or competent HR practitioner would issue contracts to an entire staff with the same start date for the same period? Is there any thought about your goals, about your expectations of your company, when you could offer all your staff same contract period, same start date? It means that at the end of the 3-year period, your organization must shut its doors because all of your employees must proceed on leave to coincide with the end of contract. And they want to come here and talk about consultant and buy-in and consultation and whatnot. And the nitty-gritty stories, we are not concerned about fluff. Okay. We are concerned about what works. Madam Presiding Officer, there is a difference between the natural life of a contract coming to an end and a pronouncement of dismissal on September 30th, 2023, in circumstances that can be perceived contrary to good industrial relations principles, practices, and procedures. But I hear the minority talk about during the same life of the board that ended in December, 6 p.m. on December 6, 2021, about people who were dismissed. People were dismissed arbitrarily. There's no mention of that. There's no mention about the refusal of the board then and the management of TADCO then to appear at court to represent the company in matters against those same workers who were dismissed. No, they're silent. They're telling us about dismissal, but it's a foreign word to them. But we know better. Yes, we know things. Okay. All right? Those same supposedly dismissed employees came to the company in December 2023 trying to negotiate with the company. Let me talk that. Okay. Madam Presiding Officer, it should be noted also that by internal memorandum, employees of TADCO were informed of an HR update exercise and were therefore asked to submit certain documents. Some employees responded, some apparently didn't, some apparently couldn't. I have before me full facts of those who responded, those who didn't, those who couldn't respond, and those who tried to. It is there, it is lodged with the division, there is nothing hiding. A proper compilation of what was asked for by this internal memo. Madam Presiding Officer, it was said to us today we must pay attention to employees. Of course, nobody likes to lose a job. Nobody. Nobody. It hurts, it pains. But, you know what I don't understand? When the PNM cast you out, let us remember Ministry for Tobago Development. We ain't forgetting that. 800 plus. We ain't forgetting that. Right? Our newspapers are replete every day with dismissals from companies in Trinidad. Right? This nation was told one night, I think it was Pigot Corner in Belmont, in case you were closing your fridge.
Not closing Petro-Train.
Let me say again, Petro-Train will not be. And you close the fridge door and the Petro-Train close.
Okay.
Right? As soon as you close the fridge door next time, Petro-Train must close. But you know, we care about people. And there are some things we must look at. It is fine for the PNM to restructure because of inefficiencies and all that was laid out. But, Madam Presiding Officer, how I look at this document, this HR update exercise, and one wonders how careless can an organization be?
Okay.
How careless? Imagine you have offered a contract to someone, operations assistant 2. The day-to-day task for someone so employed says forklift business, forklift operation, you're moving this with forklift. And the individual ain't in possession of a heavy-duty forklift license.
Okay. Okay.
Those are the realities of TATCO.
Okay.
Those are the realities. You require a special license, a forklift license.
Legally?
If you bung somebody,
Okay.
how does insurance cover you? How does the OSH Act cover you? And you have full contract, full pay, and nothing. You're careless as an organization. Something still coming down the River Nile. We hope it would reach one day. Madam Presiding Officer, as I wrap up to 6 p.m. on December 6, 2021, TATCO was a failed experiment. TATCO then was a failed experiment. 6 p.m., December 6, 2021. There is now a new board of directors in place. There is a new mandate. There is a new vision. TATCO, as it is now, must position itself to maintain or gain competitive advantage in the agribusiness sector.
Yes.
It must survive threats, and it must be able to respond positively to the ever-changing business context. Must. Madam Presiding Officer, this motion is misplaced, it's ill-placed, it's ill-conceived, it has no substance. Can this House interfere in the business of a legally incorporated company? Can this House? By what mechanism can this House advise the Board of Directors and the Line Secretary? I guess those are questions that only the minority could answer. Madam Presiding Officer, I thank you for being able to come.
Honorable members, it is 4:10. We are to break as per Standing Order 16-2 at 4:30 for resumption at 5. I am therefore asking the Deputy Chief Secretary to, in the absence of the Chief Secretary and the Leader of Assembly Business, to appoint a new Leader of Assembly Business to take us forward in this proceedings, please. Thanks.
Madam Presiding Officer, I so move that I be appointed as
Leader of Assembly business for the remainder of this sitting.
So moved. The question really was, are we going to sit for the remainder of the period, or are we going to break at 4:30?
Thank you. Additionally, Madam Presiding Officer, I beg to move that this House remains seated until all business on the order paper are dealt with.
Honorable members, the question proposed is rather that we remain seated for the remainder in order to facilitate the remainder of the business on the order paper. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any against? We will remain seated for business to be concluded. Yes, Minority Leader.
I'll just like to inform the Honourable House that I'm yet to receive the response to the question as so instructed. It's now 4:11.
So noted. Delia. Where's the clerk? Where's the clerk? Oh, well, that was something to do with it. She got to do with it. Members, I advise you all phones are supposed to be on silent and or turned off. Thank you. Yes, Minority Councillor, you may now join this debate.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to join this debate piloted by the Minority Leader as we seek to address this grave concern of the dismissal of the employees of TATCO. And Madam Presiding Officer, in spite of what the members on the other side had to say in their contribution, all of Tobago and all of Trinidad and Tobago is saying TATCO workers were dismissed. Madam Presiding Officer, if you look at the headlines, this is the article dated Thursday, 21st September by Corey Connelly. It says Tobago Agribusiness Company sends home contract workers. If you also looked at, and this one was Newsday, if you looked at Express article by Elizabeth Williams, dated September 21st, 2023, the headline reads, over 60 workers at TATCO lose their jobs. And Madam Presiding Officer, this fiasco, because of the implication to the workers and to people and how it affected persons' lives and livelihoods, was in the media for an extended period of time. We saw where the director or the chairman of TATCO having to face the media on several interviews, having to answer what really transpired. And Madam Presiding Officer, as I delve into this debate, I want to address the third preamble of the motion, which speaks to workers being dismissed unceremoniously in circumstances contrary to good industrial relations principles, practices, and procedures. And Madam Presiding Officer, I want us to take a look at the Chief Administrator's Circular Memorandum number 41 of 2016, dated the December 20th, 2016, which deals with the policy on re-engagement of officers on contract, and it speaks to the time period by which an employee should be informed in writing of the expiration of his contract. It also, and that time period based on the circular, is 3 months, and the date they are to proceed on vacation leave. The last date of the vacation leave will normally coincide with the date of the contract expiration. Madam Presiding Officer, this circular also speaks to the time frame by which the employee should indicate in writing whether or not they are interested in a new contract, which according to the circular states 2 months before the expiration of the contract. And the minority leader has in its possession letters, Madam Presiding Officer, and this particular letter is dated May 19, 2023, and it's captioned Notice of the End of Contract Engagement. And it says, it calls the employee's name. This letter serves to inform you that your current period of engagement on contract, and it gives the person's position at TADCO, is due to expire on September 30th. It says you are required to proceed on all vacation leave to your credit prior to the end of your contract period. As at May 19, which is the day of the letter, you have a balance of, and they quoted the number of days vacation leave. Madam Presiding Officer, based on the circular, it did not indicate to them when they have to proceed on leave, but it did indicate the number of days. The offer of further employment is at the discretion of the Board of Directors of TADCO and will be subject to your performance appraisal for the current contract period. Kindly indicate in writing by June 30th your interest in being considered for further employment on contract with TADCO. Please note that an updated resume with the original and copies of your qualifications must be submitted with your letter of interest to the Human Resource Department. Should you have any concerns or queries, please contact the HR department, and an extension was given, signed by the CEO. And Madam Presiding Officer, based on the circular as I just explained, this letter should indicate the date in which the employee should proceed on leave, and that was not indicated. Madam Presiding Officer, I want to continue on with this circular memorandum. And this circular by the Chief Administrator also gives timelines and it guides of what should be done when employees are being renewed, as well as if their contracts are not being renewed. And specifically, in these instances, as it relates to the TADCO workers, if the contracts are not being renewed, the circular says that if a new contract is not being offered to the employee must be informed in writing of the decision of not being offered a new contract and the reason for doing so before the end of the current contract and before the officer proceeds on end of contract vacation leave. The circular goes on to speak of valid reasons for not offering a new contract, and it includes unsatisfactory performance due to the process being followed, age in accordance with Chief Administrator Circular number 19, redundancy of position through Executive Council approved restructuring, or misconduct that is not related to performance and of course due process must be followed. The circular continues in 7, and it says if the employee is not informed of the decision to not offer a new contract before the expiration of the current contract, a new contract must be offered on the basis of legitimate expectation. And Madam Presiding Officer,
Member, to the person whose phone is on, can you kindly exit the chamber? Thank you. Minority Council, I apologize. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, just to reiterate, circular and number 7 of this circular says if the employee is not informed of the decision to not offer a new contract before the expiration of the current contract, a new contract must be offered on the basis of legitimate expectation. And A reads, if a contract employee is to be offered a new contract or has not been offered, or has not been informed that a new contract will not be offered, they are to be engaged on a new contract from the first working day after the expiration of their previous contract. And Madam Presiding Officer, again, we have in our possession a letter dated September 18th, 2023, some 2 weeks before the expiration of the contracts. This letter does not have any caption, and it reads, there, the name of the employee, the Board of Directors and Executive Management of the Tobago Agro-Business Development Company, TADCO, wish to thank you for services rendered during your contractual period, 1st October 2020 to September 30th, 2023. The company's vision and mission are paramount, and as it astutely seeks to develop agribusiness through collaboration and various projects geared towards capacity development and ensuring the island's food security and contribution to GDP. During your tenure at the Tobago Agribusiness Development Company, TADCO, your contributions would have allowed for the development and growth of the company. Noteworthy, you would have assisted in the company's transition subsequent to the amalgamation of the 3 previous entities. We wish to thank you. We wish you best of luck in your future endeavors and thank you sincerely for your commitment during your tenure. And again, this is signed by the CEO. Madam Presiding Officer, these letters did not explicitly advise the employee that they will no longer be engaged and that there was a decision to not retain them or not renew their engagement with the organization, nor did the letters, Madam Presiding Officer, based on the circular, give a reason as to why the workers were not engaged. So, Madam Presiding Officer, based on this circular memorandum, the workers should still be engaged at the TADCO company because, as stated in the preamble to our motion, due process policies and procedures were not followed. And it is clear, Madam Presiding Officer, based on the guidelines by this circular, the policies were not followed. And Madam Presiding Officer, because these correspondences did not advise the worker clearly that they had poor or unsatisfactory performance, they did not advise, and based on the information of the minority, it was indicated to us that the workers had good performance appraisal. The chairman, Madam Presiding Officer, is also on record as saying that he is pleased with the workers of TADCO, and even in the letter indicated here, the letter of thank you is saying that they have contributed to the success of TADCO. So, Madam Presiding Officer, to just unceremoniously dismiss, because if you didn't renew their contract, you send them home, so you dismiss them. And we are asking the question, what is the real reason for the non-renewal or the dismissal of the workers at TADCO? Was it restructuring, Madam Presiding Officer? And I am not sure. I heard the Secretary mention something, but I cannot be certain if the Secretary did indicate that restructuring was a reason for the dismissal. And Madam Presiding Officer, even if the organization is restructuring, why is the need to send home so many people? And Madam Presiding Officer, the chairman is on record, the chairman of the board is also on record as saying that there were no redundancies. So even if you are restructuring, there are no redundancies. Why are workers' contracts not being renewed? So, Madam Presiding Officer, I want to address now some of the comments made by the Secretary of Food Production. And the Secretary of Food Production would have spoken to the fact that over 67 persons were engaged in the company, and she spoke that the fact that under her purview that the company was not financially stable. She spoke to the fact that they received a monthly subvention of $500,000 with a wage bill of $67,000. And Madam Presiding Officer, if the company that was under the purview of this secretary did not have sufficient funding to cover the cost of the wages and the operational cost to the company, Madam Presiding Officer, it is the purview of this administration and the Executive Council, if they see it as a priority, to so reapportion and reappropriate funds so that TADCO can be adequately funded, if they see it as a priority, because the Secretary indicated under her purview. And Madam Presiding Officer, when subventions or parliamentary allocations are approved, and in the case of the Tobago House of Assembly, over $2 billion was approved in parliamentary allocation, the Tobago House of Assembly, through the Executive Council, has the authority to reprioritize as they fit. So if the Secretary did not have sufficient funds to cover her operational expenses, then she ought to blame her colleagues because they did not see TADCO as a priority to fund it adequately. Additionally, Madam Presiding Officer, the Secretary is also complaining about lack of funds, and the Minority Leader would have touched on it. And the Secretary attempted to indicate that TADCO was not involved in gambling. Madam Presiding Officer, on TADCO's social media page, and I don't think that page was hacked, there is TADCO, Tobago Agribusiness Development Company. And the caption is, TADCO invites you to participate in the largest all-fours tournament ever hosted in Tobago, with $100,000 as the first prize. Republic Weekend. Gather your teams and come out. The Shore Park Food Hub is the place to be. Food, drinks, and entertainment. Register today. Spots are moving fast. And Madam Presiding Officer, the flyer has first annual 4-table championship cup all first tournament. First prize, and it gives the date and the time and the place. First prize, $100,000. Second prize, $30,000. Third prize, $15,000. So, Madam Presiding Officer, this is TADCO's Facebook page that I am on, and there is a flyer that has TADCO's logo as well as the Shore Park Food Hub's logo. So, Madam Presiding Officer, this is whose event. So clearly TADCO is in the all-force business, and according to the Minority Leader, in the gambling business. And if you are complaining that you don't have sufficient funds or subvention to pay your wage bill, Madam Presiding Officer, the cost of, and this is just the prizes, the cost of the prizes alone is about half of what the Secretary is complaining that their subvention, their monthly subvention is. And it is also a quarter of what the wage bill is, Madam Presiding Officer. If that is not mismanagement, I don't know what is. And Madam Presiding Officer, the Secretary went on to speak about other things such as the capital of paradise. But I just want to veer back a bit. And another question that I would like to ask the Secretary of Food Production, who has general direction and control over TATCO, what about the revenue or income generating streams that are now at TATCO? The Secretary just boasted about TATCO having X amount of profits. What is being used with those? What are those profits being used for, Madam Presiding Officer? TATCO does rental of storage spaces. Where is the rental income from that activity? TATCO have sales of goods and services. What is the rent? What is the income derived from the sales of those goods and services? TATCO is now being boasted about the income derived from the capital of paradise, and the member did quote an amount. What is the income or the profit from the capital of paradise being used for? So, Madam Presiding Officer, if you are boasting about TATCO being profitable, how on the same hand you could be complaining about the subvention? Then TATCO should be in a position to sustain itself. Subvention and the amount of subvention that is being received should not be an issue if you are boasting of the profitability of the organization. Madam Presiding Officer, we are still unclear of what are the plans of this new TATCO board and this new administration for agriculture. The statistics, Madam Presiding Officer, if you look at the statistics, the statistics are shown that the agricultural sector has declined. Those are not the statistics of the minority. This is public information that is available to everyone who requires. So if you are doing so good, Madam Presiding Officer, what is accounting for the overall decline of the agricultural sector? And the previous board had a plan for TATCO and making TATCO profitable, looking at income generating projects, including improving and enhancing the existing revenue streams, and some new initiatives that included the operationalization of the processing facility at Goldsboro and the packing house, as well as meat processing activities at Louisdor. What is this administration's real plans for TATCO? Madam Presiding Officer, we hope it is not playing all fours and firing workers. The member also spoke to the Executive Council minute, not including anything on the capital of paradise. Madam Presiding Officer, if we go to the Executive Council note, the Executive Council note speaks to the agricultural sector, and it speaks to providing opportunities for expansion and cultivation of large acres of land, which will produce large quantities of agricultural products. The Executive Council note also speaks to the opportunities that will be derived from the capture of large oceanic pelagic species of fish such as tuna for export to the foreign markets. The Executive Council note also spoke about the bycatch and the other species such as albacore, kingfish, and shark, which will be utilized for the fresh and downstreaming processing in the sector and the engagement and participation of small and medium-sized entrepreneurs. So, Madam Presiding Officer, although the Executive Council note or minute did not speak specifically to the capital of paradise, it speaks to the opportunity opportunities that will be harnessed through TADCO in the agricultural sector through cultivation of lands as well as through long line fishing. So, Madam Presiding Officer, Executive Council notes and minutes will deal with policy, and therefore based on the note it sets out the policies that TADCO would harness, Madam Presiding Officer. And another thing that the Secretary mentioned is that no member of the public knew who were the persons hired to work on the capital of Paradise, what were the salaries made to the persons on the capital of Paradise. Madam Presiding Officer, just as the minority on this side, and it was demonstrated today, and every other day that we appear in this house, the minority will ask questions, and it is the responsibility of those on the other side to respond. So if the public did not know the information, Madam Presiding Officer, is it that the minority then was sleeping on their job when they were on this side? So, Madam Presiding Officer, I don't understand the point that the member was making when she spoke about the public not knowing. And it is the job of the minority to keep the Executive Council in check, to ensure transparency. So I guess the member is probably indicating that her colleagues, when they were on this side, abdicated their duties as minority. So, Madam Presiding Officer, it is crucial that we not only seek clarity on the decision, but also to condemn the callous and uncaring decisions made by the Board of Directors of TADCO and its line secretary to unceremoniously dismiss the employees of TADCO. Madam Presiding Officer, to dismiss workers in such a manner is not just a violation of good industrial relations principles, practices, and procedures, but it is a betrayal of our shared humanity, it's a betrayal of trust. It is, Madam Presiding Officer, the whole action lacked compassion, it lacked empathy, and Madam Presiding Officer, we as the minority stand with the workers of TADCO and all the workers who this administration, this uncaring, failing administration would have placed on the breadline. We cannot turn our blind eye to the impact that such dismissals on the affected individuals and their families. It is our moral obligation to ensure that every citizen is treated with dignity and respect, especially when their livelihoods are at stake. Let us instead listen to the voices of the workers who have been wronged. And Madam Presiding Officers, the voices are becoming louder and louder by the month, by the day. And based on the actions, the workers have been stripped of their dignity and their livelihoods. Let us feel their pain, their anger, because some of them are very angry, as well as their sense of betrayal. It is in that regard I wish to implore this House to stand in solidarity with TADCO workers and all workers who have suffered a similar fate under the hands of this failing, uncaring, inhumane administration. The people demands justice for those who have been wronged, and let us urge the Board of Directors of TADCO and the Line Secretary to take immediate steps to remedy this grave injustice. Madam Presiding Officer, I will end my discourse as the minority leader started his, in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Let us not turn a blind eye to the suffering of our fellow citizens, our fellow Tobagonians, and Madam Presiding Officer, our fellow Tobagonians are suffering because we are hearing the cries. Let us stand together united on our pursuit to fairness, equity, and compassion." Madam Presiding Officer, I thank you for the opportunity to contribute.
Minority Leader, you may now wrap up this debate.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, and thank you for the opportunity to end this debate. Okay. Madam Presiding Officer, today the people of Tobago got an opportunity to look at the people they gave their trust, they gave their vote, and who they placed to seek their interest. And by the contributions of both the line secretary and the assistant secretary in the office of the chief secretary, what is crystal clear is that this administration has absolutely no care, no concern for the well-being of the workers of TATCO and in extension, the workers of the Tobago House of Assembly and the people of Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, in my presentation, I shared with you one instance of the many hardships that the persons who did not get their contracts renewed at TATCO is facing at this time. And for all that was placed on the table, at no point the Secretary dealt with the heartache of losing your job. It was about pelting attacks, personal attacks at the messenger, because we on this side choose to stand with people who have been disenfranchised, people who are hurting, people who are unable to earn an income, and as a responsible minority, we found it important for us as a house, as an assembly, to ask the secretary, through her, to ask her board to rescind that decision and reinstate the employees. And rather than considering that information, the secretary has chosen to attack the minority council, the minority bench personally, when we have so many Tobagonians on the breadline at this point in time. Madam Presiding Officer, and I just want to treat with some of the information placed in the public domain, which has me quite perplexed, because in one breath, the Secretary spoke in glowing terms about the achievement of TATCO, and of course we welcome any good news that is coming out of TATCO. And therefore she talked about the capital of paradise and the revenue being generated there. But as she spoke about the capital of paradise, you would swear that a boat could be repaired in 2 weeks, because at no point in time she made or gave the former board any credit for being able to resuscitate the capital of paradise. So when she was there talking about the 5 years being on dry dock, she didn't also note that is was under the previous TATCO board and the formation of TATCO, where this boat had the major part of its repairs. And I have a report here about that reports on the dry docking of Capital of Paradise. And this process was a process that went from the 13th to the 25th of October 2021. And it tells you about all the work completed, hauled out the vessel, scraped of marine growth of hull. It talked about them removing the keel. And what is even interesting, even the current chairman provided support to that process. Even, and I want to repeat that, even the current chairman of TATCO was engaged at the professional level to provide support to get the boat back in order by the previous board. So if the boat just appeared, abracadabra, how come the previous chairman could have provided work? And that is the disingenuity of this administration, the deception, because they will give you the appearance like the PNM, the former administration and the former board did absolutely nothing when it came to the Capital of Paradise, when the truth is most of the work, including onboarding the captain, it was the former board that engaged the captain, but that wasn't said here today. What we were told is that they engaged the entire Tobago crew, but not telling the people of Tobago that there was a process, and with governance, which is a continuum, they, in this instance, continued a good process. And whatever is to come, whatever good outcome that is to be had, we all should applaud it and welcome it. But Madam Presiding Officer, at the same time, we are hearing of the revenue, or the profit of this aspect of TATCO. But at the same time, we are also hearing that TATCO cannot meet its monthly wage obligation. So, any common sense would tell you, if you are getting revenue, and if your revenue is unable to meet your expenses, then somewhere down the line, you're operating at a loss. And she was very clear to point out all the loss of the previous versions of this, of TATCO, that is the FIPCOT, the TCPL, and the TICO-SWAV. But at no point in time she told us whether TATCO, as an organization, is making a profit. And the question is, where are the audited financial statements of TATCO at this time? Does TATCO have any audited financial statements so that the people of Tobago, who are the shareholders of TATCO, could know whether, not just seeing that you're posting that you're catching fish and you're making money, but whether the company as a whole is profitable or whether the company is not profitable. And I thought if we are doing because she talked about transparency, and if she was going to be very transparent, you would think information as vital as that in treating with the decision to fire people, that would be also placed on the table. And as far as I am concerned, we heard absolutely nothing about whether TATCO is viable or whether TATCO is profitable, because she also talked in glowing terms about the contract farming in poultry. And I watched the presentation yesterday and the JSC hearing where TATCO made an appearance as part of the THA team. And when the question was asked about the poultry farming, the chairman was quick again to tell all of Trinidad and Tobago about how much revenue was earned from selling the produce. But when the question was asked, how much did you expend? How much money did you spend to earn this 1.1 million? And he started to fumble. So you knew how much you receive, but you didn't know how much you put out. And you are telling me this is a board that you are saying is doing so much excellent work, and they don't even have basic fiduciary, basic numbers to know whether if they're making a profit or not. They don't even have the numbers to say, well, we put $700,000 out. That is to cover the birds and the feed. And we were able, when we sold the birds, we were able to make we received 1.1, so anyway, you make about $500,000 or so, or $400,000 or so. They didn't do that. So up to now, you're speaking in growing terms about the contract farming, but we don't know how much you spend. Even as we speak, they are owing the poultry farmers as we speak. And I challenge her. I challenge her because I recognize she has this thing about talking about reality. And I challenge her to dispute that reality, that even as we speak, TADCO has a liability to the contract farmers. Madam Presiding Officer, it must be noted that staff under the previous arrangement and the previous board, staff salaries were met every month prior to the introduction of this new administration. So, notwithstanding what we were told about, because they made their duty to carry us way back in times. But we, from the beginning of the presentation, it was acknowledged that the former companies had profitability challenges. And it was for that reason why the experts were brought in to streamline the companies and to put them on a pathway to profitability. That is why the companies were merged in the first place. So coming and trying to dig up back all kind of dead bones doesn't help the situation. That does not give back the worker their job. And this motion is treating with the employment of people. This motion is dealing with bread, the people bread, and the people butter. That is the essence of the motion. And it is either you have a plan to reinstate them, or you don't have a plan to reinstate them. That is the essence of the motion. So carrying we all around the merry-go bush to tell me everything else except what you're doing with the workers. Because you say engage, you re-engage 50. But you haven't told us what you're doing with the rest. And these people are home, anxiously waiting to find out, because HR best practices, as my colleague pointed out, you can't give someone a thank you letter today and they're going home tomorrow. You're supposed to give that person adequate time if you know you're not re-engaging them, so that they can prepare their lives. These are human beings we're talking about. These aren't machines. It's not even animals. These are human beings that have a family to treat with, that have bills to treat with, and you will just take somebody, send them. In fact, you didn't even terminate them in a real sense. You just tell them go home and wait for a call. Is that how we're treating people in Tobago? When we just say we are one family? That is how family does treat family? Madam Presiding Officer, I just want to also highlight and treat with the issue of the board and the misdirection of the board. Currently, there's no proper plan in place, and based on what we listened, I asked about the strategic plan, and there was none. There's no real new revenue generating activities happening, because outside of the capital of paradise, we heard of none. Madam Presiding Officer, the management is basically opting to explore every suggestion that they come across, as opposed to having a detailed plan for the direction of the company. And for example, as I'll continue to point out, the food hub as an event hub instead of its intended purpose is a perfect example of the misdirection and the misalignment of this current TADCO board. Madam Presiding Officer, What is happening? Very early, we saw the secretary and the chairman going to Grenada. A lot of money was expended on those ventures, even going to other places and talking about flour, these alternative flour and so forth. What is happening with the alternative flour? It has been 2 years we're waiting, and I've not seen anything coming out of this alternative flour. What about the arrangement with Novo? What is happening there? What is happening? How much money has been spent? How much of Tobago's money has been spent on building Novo? Madam Presiding Officer, ultimately, and as I said, how much money has been paid to Novo? And if any was paid, couldn't these money be better put in the hands and in the pockets and in the homes of Tobago farmers? Madam Presiding Officer, when in closing and in treating with the secretary's, the line secretary, assertion that I continue to mislead this House, I am yet to hear her provide cogent, clear information that refutes the fact that $100,000 was spent on a stage. I challenge her to tell us whether any money was spent on the stage and how much. Because if you're saying it's not 100,000, tell us how much money was spent on the stage. And I realize this administration seemed to like stages, because you will recall over 200,000 being spent on a stage in the sea. No, 2 million. 2 million on a stage in the sea. And now we are being told about 100,000 being spent on a stage at Lure to dance cocoa. But Madam Presiding Officer, while all this mismanagement is happening, you have persons, and the fact remains, there are still persons at home without a job, without an income, have absolutely no idea whether the company will recall them. They have absolutely no idea what are the alternatives. Is the THA going to redeploy these people into other areas of the THA? We heard, I thought the administration would actually come and tell us that there's a plan, there's a buffer for these people. But what we have heard is deafening silence and a clear indication that they have absolutely no care for the THA workers and Tobago people. So, Madam Presiding Officer, as I close, I would simply ask the Tobago people to take note of who is standing up and speaking out for them, and take note of who is actually holding the whip and beating them to the crosses. I thank you.
Honorable members, the question put is, whereas the Tobago Agribusiness Development Company Limited, TADCO, is a registered entity under the Division of Food Security, Natural Resources, the Environment and Sustainable Development of the Tobago House of Assembly, the company being formed in 2020 through the amalgamation of the Tobago Cassava Products Limited, Tobago Cold Storage and Warehouse Facility Limited, and the Fish Processing Company of Tobago, all being former companies under the Tobago House of Assembly. And whereas TADCO became the successor company to the 3 companies named above, retained the services of all of their employees, and who were put to function in positions laid out in a new organizational structure, approved for operations of this new company with assumption of duties effective 1st October 2020. And whereas the workers were all dismissed, saving for a few security officers on 30th September 2023 in circumstances contrary to good industrial relation principles, practices, and procedures. Be it resolved that this House seeks clarity on the decision made by the Board of Directors of TADCO and its line secretary to unceremoniously dismiss the employees of TADCO. And be it further resolved that this House advises the Board of Directors of TADCO and its line secretary to take immediate steps to remedy this grave injustice. Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Nay. The nays have it. The motion is not granted.
Motion for adjournment.
Leader of Assembly Business.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I beg to move that this House be adjourned to a date to be fixed.
Honourable members, the question is that this House now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Any against? The ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed. Good afternoon, members.